Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Big Game Hunters. I'm Mike.
And I'm Tom. Today's game is Mage Wars, the customizable strategy game of dueling mages from Brian Pope and Arcane Wonders. But first we have Chit Chat.
That's right, Tom. And in today's Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about barriers of entry, the idea that games must be learned and everything that goes along with it. We really hope you enjoy it. Hi, and welcome to the Chit Chat. Today's topic is barriers of entry, the idea that games are a social medium. Unlike books or movies, games have to be taught to a person before he can enjoy them. This gives them kind of a unique place in the industry of entertainment. Even video games have usually tutorial levels, or you simply learn as you go. So today we're going to talk about what that means for gaming and what different things make it more difficult or easier to learn and get into a game and enjoy it with your friends.
So, Mike, one
Tom.
of the biggest barriers of entry that I encounter in games often is poorly written rulebooks.
Yes.
Now, let me tell you what I mean
Excellent
by
starting
that.
point.
Let me tell you what I mean by that. A good rulebook is going to have what I like to call paths of entry. So if it's a short game, a party game, and the rulebook is really small, paths of entry is going to be something like just the heading sections of the rulebook, like game setup, gameplay or turn order or something like that, and then how the game ends, how the game wins. So those are paths of entry into the rulebook, so that when you're assimilating the game, when you're learning the game, you know which section to go to reference that part of the game. So for a more complex rulebook or really long rulebook, like Mage Wars, for example, it's going to have even more paths of entry. Not only is it going to have those same kinds of sections, but the sections are going to be broken up into like the turn phases or how combat works. And it'll also have helpful things like table of contents or an index or keywords or glossary or whatever. So, my question to you, when you're learning a game for the first time, are you more often learning from a rulebook, or are you learning from another person, or is it equal? Or what do you think the biggest barrier of entry you encounter is?
That's a good. I think I end up learning games about half from other players and half from rulebooks. I buy a lot of games. I'm kind of the source for most of the games in my play group, and so I end up having to read a lot of the books. On the other hand, I have a friend who I've gotten into gaming, and he teaches me a lot of games, so I learn a lot from him or from other people that I encounter. I think for me, it's easier to learn from another person. In fact, I would say that's probably true of most people. I think...
Yeah, it's true that in any given group, usually one person learns the game and teaches it to everyone else.
Yeah.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, that kind of, like, that's what I'm talking about with that viral medium. That's kind of the social spreading of the game, that most people end up not learning from a rule book, but from other people that they're playing it with. Now, I think when you're talking about a rule book, I agree with everything you've said. I also would add that, just like the headings, I want a nice index, especially with terms that come up over and over again. With something like Race to the Galaxy, I want to be able to just say, consume powers, and look that up in the index, bam, the section on consume powers. In terms of, also with the rulebook, I think I want, I really like the sort of reminder boxes, or boxes that are used to kind of remind you of unintuitive rules. So something that isn't necessarily common in the genre, I love when designers put it in a little section. I
do appreciate that also, the little reminder boxes. I don't like when they mix reminder boxes with rules text, important rules text that are offset in their own box. I've seen this a couple times. I can remember it happening in the World of Warcraft board game, where an entire section on how dice work is sectioned off into its own thing, and you kind of skip over it when you're reading.
Right, you
rules.
Think it's an example or a clarification.
Exactly.
Right.
And then you get to the end of the rulebook and you're...
Yeah, you have to be consistent with the
WTF.
formatting. I agree. And like Tom Vassell, I hate when rules are on cards or even on the board. One thing that I always throw myself on, I always get screwed up on, is when I'm teaching Battlestar Galactica, a game we'll look at later, I always get messed up in terms of the actions on Galactica. Because there's about 7 different things you can do on the ship, and they're defined only on the ship. You can't find them in the rulebook. There's not a quick reference. So when you're going through it, you end up saying at some point, and there's a bunch of other actions you can take, which you guys can look at yourselves, because I forget what they are, and they're not in a clean place for me to look. So I think if it's in the rulebook, it all has to be in the rulebook. Now, the other path of entry, the term you've heard here first, folks, is like we talked about, learning from another person. When you're learning it from another player, what kinds of things work best for you? Do you find it difficult to learn from another player? What kind of players make good teachers? What do you think about that?
When I'm learning a game, I don't really find any sort of difficulty in any given person or style of learning a game. Outside distractions can sometimes hinder me, like if it's on a convention floor. I learn lots of games there. I get distracted by the hot cosplay chick walking by, or
Understandable.
or even in like a game store or something, the guy's BO can really distract you. but otherwise, as long as there's nothing tearing my attention away from the game, it's usually pretty easy to get the game from another person.
Fair enough. I think for me personally, the tutorial that you'll see me give every episode is kind of been built up over time. It's kind of, as I was learning it from different people, the same questions came back up into my head over and over. So when I'm learning again, the first thing I want to know every time is the objective. That frames everything for me. The next thing I always want to know is how the game ends. Most publishers and designers put that at the very end, which is natural chronologically. But without knowing what we're playing until, I can't keep the rest of it in my head.
It helps to put in perspective all the other mechanics you're going to learn about the game when you learn those two things first.
I agree. And I also think that on this show, for instance, I like to give a full tutorial. There may be kind of corner cases and niche rules and things you have to look up in a book somewhere. Or, for instance, we can't give every power in every game.
Right.
But I like to give a full tutorial, and I like to be given a full tutorial. If I'm going to play a game for the first time, I don't want it to be a throwaway experience. I know a lot of designers and players talk about the first play as kind of not counting or kind of being a waste. I want to try that first time. That first game is exciting for me, and even though I probably won't do as well, as I will in later plays, or I probably won't beat a veteran player, I want that to be a real experience. I want to learn from that first game. I want to make mistakes in the strategy and in the tactics, not in the rules.
That's where I disagree. When I'm in a group, and like at home, I'm usually in a group where it's not people who are avid gamers. They do play board games, but they're not involved in learning and designing board games so much. So I do like to play that first, maybe not a full game, but 3-4 turns of a game, just to sort of get the pattern down and get everyone recognizing the actions they're going to take. And then we just wipe the board and start over, and they can start thinking critically, maybe a little more about their decisions. And I think that results in a better first real game for us.
So with that in mind, do you think it's hard to learn a game without having played it even in an example setting? Because earlier you mentioned, you don't have too much trouble learning from another person.
It's not necessarily hard to learn, but you're learning two things at once at that time when you do that. You're learning the mechanics and interaction of the game as you play it. You're remembering the phases or where your chits go or whatever it is you're learning. You're learning the mechanical aspect of moving these parts, and you're also learning how the game comes together as a whole. You're learning the strategy and tactics of it.
And you can't get that from the rulebook or from another player.
Right.
You can get pro tips, but you need to play it yourself.
So by doing the example game, you're sectioning those out into two separate things that I think is easier for most people.
I would agree with that. And finally, how do you think that, so we've talked about different ways to teach the games, different ways to learn them, what works for us and doesn't. What do you think about the idea that games, board games specifically, tabletop gaming, you have to have it taught to you, or you have to learn it from a book. You can't learn it from experiencing. You can't just sit down and have it wash over you. You can't engage with it alone. You can't, you can't play a tutorial level. How does that change the way that the games industry, the tabletop industry works compared to other industries?
The first thing I can think of is that it makes it hard to sell games, because in the same way that games are taught to a group by that one person, it's usually that one person who bought the game, and no one else at the table feels the need to buy the game. So unless it's a public setting like a game store or a convention where games are actively being sold, no one walks away with from that table with the need to buy the game.
Right.
Anything from you?
I agree, and I think that on the same lines, you're mentioning that it's hard to get people into it. It's hard to sell enough copies for everybody because you can have one copy enjoyed by several people. I think also publishers could do more to lower the barrier of entry, to make it easier for people to learn their games, because a lot of groups don't have somebody who's willing to go out and buy games, who don't have somebody who's willing to teach them. And so if there were more videos like these tutorials or like what Fantasy Flight, I have to give them credit, is doing right now with their games.
They have a lot of videos. Yeah.
A nice multi-part tutorial to spell it out for people, and I think that's going to generate more interest in the hobby, and that's good for everybody.
If you can think of anything publishers can do to alleviate your barriers of entry, leave us a comment below. Stay tuned for Mage Wars.
Now I'm going to teach you how to play Mage Wars. Mage Wars is a game of dueling mages in which each player controls one mage in an arena. They fight in gladiatorial combat until only one mage comes out victorious. The object of the game is to reduce the opposing mage down to 0 life points. As soon as that happens, the mage who has not had his life points reduced to 0 wins. The Mage Wars box is filled with a wide variety of components. To begin with, each mage will have one of these health and mana trackers. It will tell you how much life your mage has remaining, how much mana is in your mana pool, and how much mana you gain when you channel. When you begin the game, you'll place these wooden cubes on the various slots as indicated on your mage card. The game comes with tons of damage dice. They feature 2 blank sides, a 1 and 2 side with no burst, and a 1 and 2 side with a burst. That will be used for critical damage, which I'll explain later. The game comes with an effect die, which is a d12, that will be used to determine various spell effects that are usually on attacks. It also comes with these activation tokens, which can be flipped to denote whether a creature has acted or not. And a quick cast marker, which is used to determine whether your mage has already used his quick cast for the turn. It also comes with tons of counters. The various counters are used to show status effects, such as sleep, stun, or burn. You'll also have an initiative token, which will pass back and forth. Finally, for tokens, there are damage markers and mana tokens, which can be used to denote damage and mana. Of course, the game would be incomplete without 322 cards. There are 4 mages included in the game, and each mage has a card that will represent it when it's on the board. In addition, each mage has a reference card telling you where your starting values are and lists some special abilities. The cards themselves are dense, so I'm going to have to go over them slowly. There are 6 different kinds of spells, and each one has different abilities on it. This is a summon. On a summon, you'll see the mana cost, the time it takes to cast the spell. In this case, it's an hourglass, so it's a full round spell. The range of the spell, in this case, it's 0, so it must be cast in the same zone as the mage. What it targets, in this case, it targets the zone. Any mana that the creature generates, this is called channeling. A defense, if applicable. An armor value. Health. Any attacks, in this case, it's a melee attack that deals 1 die of damage. And any other abilities it may have. There are many keywords and abilities in the game, and I won't be able to go over them all in this tutorial. In addition, there's equipment cards. The gray border cards are equipment. They feature similar stats, mana cost, cast time, in this case a quick spell denoted by the lightning bolt, the range, in this case 0 to 2 zones away, what it targets, equipment will almost exclusively target a mage, the slot it occupies, in this case the equipment is used as a weapon, the types of attacks or abilities the equipment has. In this case, it can make either a full round or a quick attack. And finally, any abilities at the bottom. There are attacks. These are the red bordered spells. These are usually the most straightforward types of spells. You'll again see mana cost, cast time, range, and target type at the top. In the middle, you'll have the attack type. In this case, it's a ranged 5-die attack with various effects determined by the effect d12. And the, of course, type of spell in the top. There are incantations. These are the blue border types. This has the widest variety of effects. You'll see the same stats you're familiar with at the top, including the school and type, and usually just an effect at the bottom. Incantations will sometimes heal damage, but will rarely deal it. There are conjurations. These are the green bordered. Sometimes they are zone specific. If a thing is zone exclusive, only one zone exclusive object can be in that zone at a time. These sometimes have channeling and occasionally will feature armor and health, just like a summon. They can almost never move. Finally, there are enchantments. Enchantments are a bit complicated because they have two different costs. The first cost in blue on the left is what you'll use when you attach it to a mage. The second cost, which will sometimes be blue and other times red, is what you pay when you reveal it. If it's a red cost, then you must reveal it if applicable. Finally, you have a gigantic, luxurious Mage Wars board where all your fights will take place. To set up a two-player game of Mage Wars, first, each player must select a mage. My favorite is the wizard. Once you've chosen your mage, take the corresponding card and put it in front of you. This will be used to determine where your mage is on the map. Then, take the corresponding reference card and look at the number in the book, in this case, 120. That's how many spell points you'll have to build your spell book. Grab a spell book, and you can start putting cards into the open slots. When you're putting cards into your book, you must look at the spell level and spell type. Banish is a level 3 arcane spell. Since the wizard is trained in arcane, you spend 3 spell points to slot Banish into your book. If the wizard was not trained in arcane, you'd have to spend double, so Banish would cost 6 points. Some mages are particularly bad at certain spell schools, so some mages must pay triple to include those spells in their books. In addition, some spells are restricted to particular mages. For instance, this Raven Familiar can only be used by an arcane mage. Other spells are listed as epic spells. These you can only include one of in your book. And yet other spells are novice spells. Any mage can include these without paying extra points. Once you're both finished building your spell book, take your mage card and place it in opposite corners of the map. Then place a quick cast marker and an activation token on your mage. These will be used to show whether your mage has acted or not. Then, take the wooden cubes provided and place them on the appropriate slots on your board. You'll refer to your reference card again. The mage starts with 32 health and 10 channeling. Place them on the respective slots, and each mage begins with a mana pool of 10. Finally, roll for initiative. The player who wins the roll takes the initiative token. The initiative token will pass back and forth throughout the game. Mage Wars is not played in turns, but instead in activations. So first the mage with initiative will activate, then the opposite mage, and so on and so forth. Each turn of Mage Wars is played out in 2 stages, the ready stage and the action stage. First, in the ready stage, you pass the initiative token to your opponent. In the first turn of the game, the initiative token is held by the player who won the roll. Then, you reset. In the reset stage, each activation token and quick cast token is flipped to its available side. Then, you channel mana. Each mage channels mana equal to his channel value. This value can be modified by various cards in the game. In addition, familiars and spawn points channel mana by having tokens placed on them. Mana tokens are placed on any spawn point or familiar that has a channel value. These creatures and objects can use extra mana from the mages to cast their spells. Then, you move on to the upkeep phase. Nothing happens in the upkeep phase unless a card requires it to. This will usually be payment of ongoing effects. Then, the planning phase. This is the real meat of the ready stage. In the planning phase, both players refer to their spell books and may ready 2 spells for their mages, plus an additional spell for anything they can cast, such as a spawn point or a familiar. The cards are placed face down next to the appropriate casters. Any spells that you didn't cast on your last round are returned to your spellbook at this time. It's important to note that you do not have to cast the spells that you prepare on any given turn, but those are the only spells you may cast. Finally, the deployment phase. In the deployment phase, any spawn points now cast their spells. These are usually summons. After completing the ready stage, you move on to the action stage. The action stage begins with the first quick cast phase. When you go to quick cast, you'll turn your quick cast activation marker to the used side, choose one of your 2 prepared spells with the quick timing, that's the lightning bolt icon, pay its mana cost, and cast it normally. The player with the initiative token will be the first who has the opportunity to quick cast in the turn. After he is quick casted or chosen not to, that choice passes to his opponent. Once both players have completed their quick casting or chosen not to do so, then you move on to the action phase. Yeah, and it is important to know that either before or after any of your creature's activations, including your mage, you have another opportunity to use your quick cast for the turn. You may only quick cast once for the turn, and you can only do so when your marker is on the ready side. After the action phase, there will be one final opportunity for all players to quick cast, which will work identically to the first quick cast phase, with the player who has the initiative token having the first opportunity to quick cast. In the creature action stage of the turn, each player will have the opportunity to activate his or her creatures. First, the player with the initiative token will have the opportunity to act. It is important to remember that if your opponent ever has more activation tokens available, that's on the burst side, than you may pass your activation and he can go instead. When you activate a creature, you flip the activation marker to the used side, and you may take either a full round action or a quick action and a move action. When you take a full round action, you are either going to make a full round attack, that is an attack with an hourglass next to it, or cast a full round spell, such as a summon. This takes up your entire activation, and you may not move when you do so. Instead, you may make a move action along with a quick action. When you may move one space orthogonally. That means you can move one space in any direction, not diagonally. Your movement is hindered if you begin the play in a space that contains an enemy creature, or if you are trying to move through an enemy creature. Therefore, when you are moving your mage or any creature, you cannot move twice if there is something in your way. As your quick action, you may take a second move action, assuming you are not hindered. Therefore, you can, under normal conditions, move 2 spaces. In addition, for your quick action, you may make a quick attack. A quick attack will usually be available as a basic attack on your mage card or on some equipment. A quick attack works just like a full round attack, except it has the lightning bolt symbol next to it. When you do make an attack with your mage or any of your creatures, you first declare the target and resolve any sort of extra effects involved. There are actually quite a few stages of attacking, but most of them are rarely used. When you go to make an attack, you'll roll damage dice equal to the number of dice indicated. In this case, a quick attack here would be 4 damage dice. And you compare the results to any armor your opponent has. 1s and 2s without a burst are compared to armor. 2s and 1s with a burst are critical damage and bypass any armor value. Blanks, of course, do no damage. In addition to attacking and moving as your quick action, you may cast a quick spell. There are a wide variety of quick spells in the game, including attack spells, as I mentioned, equipping equipment, playing conjurations or enchantments, finally, incantations. The last thing you can do as your quick action is to guard. When you guard, you place a guard token on the creature that is guarding. When you are in a guarding state, any creature that makes an attack against you provokes a counterattack. You can make a quick attack that is available to you, to either your creature or your mage that is guarding, as an immediate counterattack in response. In addition, if a creature is guarding in a zone, no creature can attack another creature that isn't guarding in the same zone, assuming it's an enemy. Therefore, if I had a guarding mage and a non-guarding creature, an opponent would have to attack my mage if he were in the same zone and could not instead attack my creature. Guard tokens are removed at the beginning of the creature's next activation. When casting quick spells, the wide variety of spells mean that each spell works a little differently. For an equipment, you place the spell face up in front of you, and it stays in play unless it is destroyed. It gives you often ongoing effects, such as extra attacks or extra channeling. When you play conjurations, they are played to a zone. Sometimes they are zone exclusive, in which case no more than one can be in that zone at a time. Note that zone exclusive and non-zone exclusive conjurations can be in the same zone. A conjuration will occasionally have an armor value and health value the same way your mage might. In this way, they can be attacked. However, they can very rarely move as they are usually inanimate objects. You may also be casting enchantments. When you cast an enchantment, you pay 2 mana, that's the number in the far corner, and you place it up to 2 squares away under the target. Later, you can reveal the enchantment. Most enchantments can be revealed at any time, including right after you play them, but some have special restrictions determining when you can reveal them. If the second number, the number you must pay to activate the enchantment or reveal it, is in red, you must activate it when appropriate. There are also incantations. This spell category is sort of a catch-all, and it includes a wide variety of effects. Incantations are played, you do what they say, and then discard them. Finally, as a full round action, you may summon a creature. Creatures have their own activation tokens, but when they are summoned, they come into play on the used side. This means that it is rare for you to be able to activate a creature on the same turn that you have summoned it. Some creatures channel mana and have other abilities very similar to a mage. Going forward, you'll be able to activate your creatures the same way you would a mage, and if you have more activation tokens available to you than your opponent, he can pass his activation. Mage Wars is an expansive game, and there are just some elements I can't cover in this tutorial. The game includes myriad keywords, status effects, and special abilities that are unique to each mage. You should probably keep a rulebook handy so you can reference these abilities as needed. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and now on to the review. Now that you know how to play Mage Wars, we're going to take a look at it in our point-counterpoint review.
Since we actually agree about this game, we're going to roll off to see which of us argues for it and which of us argues against. If it's an even roll, I get the pros. If it's odd, he does.
That's right.
2.
It's a result of 2, so you will be for Mage Wars, and I will be arguing against.
It's a good game. I win.
Well, maybe you should give it a little stronger start than that, Tom.
All right. Well, my favorite thing about the game is got to be the thematic, evocative feel you get from just how involved you come with the game. It really feels like you're part of a fantasy role-playing game with, like, you get your little stat sheet, all your spells do interesting and evocative stuff. You build a little equipment that builds up, like leveling up your character almost. Just everything about the game is so evocative of, I am this mage in the arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's very much an experiential game. I definitely do get that feeling. But what pulls me out of experiential games like this, and I mentioned something similar with Last Night on Earth, is just how rulesy this one is. So there's just a lot of little niche things. I'm constantly flipping through the rulebook, constantly looking up keywords, constantly. There's 8 steps to the battle order. Only 4 of them are used most of the time. There's just a lot of little things in it. The rulebook, I mean, it's called the rulebook and codex for a reason, guys. It's they're not lying with that. It's pretty thick. And I think that there's just a little bit too much of that. And there's a few little nitpicky things, I'll admit, that make it kind of tricky when you're learning the game. For instance, they use quick cast and quick spell. And those things have very different meanings.
Yep.
But it's hard to keep them straight in your head. So
the real trick is that they're not interchangeable.
No.
Right.
And so when I first read a card like Jinx, I read quick cast as quick spell, and that caused me to misunderstand it. And I think that's a very easy mistake to make. Along the same lines, quick casting is a little bit more complicated than I think it needs to be. There's a quick cast phase in the beginning where you have to see if everyone wants to pass priority or not. There's a quick cast phase at the end where you do it again. And you can quick cast anytime during your turn. I feel like that could have been streamlined in some way. I mean, they could have really probably just cut off the first and last quick cast phase and just let you integrate your quick cast into the turn. The turn player with the initiative token would still get the first chance to do it, and it wouldn't really change gameplay that much.
Well, you mentioned you'd like to see things more streamlined. How about the spellbooks and how they work for the game? Whether you build your spellbook in advance or you use the pre-made spellbooks, you have access to this entire tome during the game. Like, how awesome is that? How many card games give you that?
None. And I think that's, we will reflect that in the breakdown later. And I think that really is a big selling point. Maybe the biggest with this one. I can't argue against the spellbook. I do really love it. But there is a caveat, of course. The spells are, for the most part, evocative and unique and really do interesting and specific things. But there's they let a few staples slip through. As any TCG player will tell you, staple spells are ones that everyone's going to want to include in their deck. They just have too much power or too much versatility compared to the other options. There are a few, I think, that slip through the cracks with this. Dissolve, Dispel, a few of the arcane spells, I think, really come up over and over again. Seeking, Dispel, the ones that you really just want in any well-rounded spell book is going to want to include those spells, meaning that everybody ends up dipping into the arcane school for that, and you see the same thing a few more times than I would like to.
As much as the spellbook allows you to determine your tactics and your game strategy without having to rely on card draw, that's true. Everybody's got to have those spells.
And some of the most potent spells, I think, end up being the class-specific ones. So when you're building your spellbook as a wizard, those first 5 spell slots pretty much almost always should be the wizard-specific spells. Yep. So you're kind of a little bit pigeonholed in that way, too.
Yep, that's rough. That's rough. Well, the last thing I have to say that I love about the game is the art. Everything, it's just well done. It's maybe everyone can remember back to when Magic the Gathering's art really improved. It's awesome. It's beyond anything early Magic ever did, and it's all not only is it evocative of the card.
Show and banish.
Not only is it evocative of the mechanic that they're portraying, it's well made. It's well paired with the. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, it fits the description.
It all just fits. Yeah.
And I think one thing that I like about this art that I can't say of Magic is it's really consistent too. Even though there are different artists involved in the project, the art has a very consistent and clean.
That is exactly what I was going for. It's so consistent. Yes.
That's why I'm here for you.
Thanks.
I do love the art also. That builds right into the great theme of Mage Wars. But the thing is, all this, at the end of the day, builds up to a pretty fun experience. But because Mage Wars is such an involved game, such a long game, such a rulesy game, I really wish that it didn't come down to these so frequently. There's a lot of dice rolling.
Or that one.
Yeah, or the effect. And those critical hits just really swing the game often. Yep. For a game that's really usually so tight because of the way the mana generation works, it's really hard to get a huge edge. It's difficult to kind of snowball too much unless you have these go in your favor.
It is disappointing that the huge edge most often comes from good die rolls versus bad die rolls.
Yeah, I feel like 2 equally skilled players are usually going to look back at these games and you can trace, where they went south, and it's usually going to be a result of the dice. That's, I know that we have a little bit different luck tolerances.
I'm in favor of it.
But the dice really hurt it for me.
It's true, it does. It brings down the level of skill needed, and as we'll see in the breakdown, just gives it sort of an odd score there.
Mm-hmm. So, despite all that, what do you think about the game as a whole?
I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10. Like I said, I'm a fan of luck in games, and I think this one comes close to striking the right balance, but a lot of emphasis is weighed on those dice, and I think it does hurt the strategy aspect of this game. 7 out of 10 for me. It looks great. Otherwise...
Yeah, you know what? I feel like I should be playing the Mimic card because I say the same thing. 7 out of 10, and it would be higher if not for the dice. Now, that said, I actually think that dice do need to be included in this game because there's so little luck elsewhere. There's so little variation that the dice make it so that if there are some slight imbalances in the game design, they don't come through as much. The dice kind of mask imperfection, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm saying that it's not well designed and not that the spells aren't balanced. I think they did a nice job with it. But the dice make it so that the game can't be solved quite as easily. I wish that they had different kinds of sides rather than just being, 0-1, 2, 0-1 burst, 2 burst. I wish there had been some maybe colors on the dice or maybe some other system that worked a little better for me. But I can see why they included them. Regardless, on the whole, I'm going to agree with Tom on this one, 7 out of 10. So yeah, I think that's our take on Mage Wars. And now Tom is going to really go into a little more detail in the breakdown.
All right, this is the breakdown for Mage Wars. The game plays in about 2 hours for 2 players. If you do multiplayer, it's going to be 3 or more hours. If you include customizing your spellbook, we gave it 90 long for a reason. Gameplay is fast. The turns alternate. The initiative marker passes around the table. You have the ability to quick cast at almost any time. For that reason, we gave it 75 fast. Spellbook customizing and spell selection can slow the game down, so it gets 25 slow. It is a high skill game. We gave it 65 skill because every aspect besides dice rolling is dependent on player decisions. It earns 35 luck, which is higher than most games we'd give of this type because of the dice-driven combat mechanic, which really decides whether or not your player decisions are effective. The skill required for the game is an even split between strategy and tactics at 45-55. We give the edge to tactics because the order in which you resolve your actions really determines how effective you are on your turn. There's tons of interaction in Mage Wars, from the ability to always quick cast your spell to the spells and abilities that directly affect your opponents. It earns a 70 interaction. Only 30 independence because spell building and spell customization are really the only things you're doing by yourself. It's an immensely immersive game with 95 immersion, from the evocative spell books to attaching equipment to your character to feeling like you're a character in a fantasy role-playing game. This game is super immersive. We give it 5 abstraction because really the board is the only thing that takes you out of that character with being just a simple 3x4 grid. It is a pretty complex game. The very core rules of it are clean, and you can play it simply by just using the pre-built spell decks, but the rules are super quirky with timing of quick casts and what you can quick cast, all the keywords and statuses that you get. For these reasons, it earns a 20 in simplicity and an 80 in complexity. Similarly, portability and grandeur can be made a little portable by pre-building your deck and bringing it to a friend's house or a tournament, but really this game is big, it has expansions, there's a lot of extras you can buy, and for those reasons, we give it 80 grandeur and 20 portability. For expandability completeness, it's a near even split at 55-45. The core game does have 4 unique mages you can use, and you can customize their spellbook, but at its heart, it's a dueling game. You're going to want more mages and more spells. For our trophy scales and originality, we give it 4 trophies. The spellbook is just so unique, it really opens up all the available strategies to you, makes it such a versatile game. For value, it gets 3 trophies. The price is fair, and the components are great but not exceptional. The only real problem is that there's no components for 4-player games, which you can buy separately. That's the breakdown for Mage Wars. Both Mike and Tom give it a 7 out of 10.
We hope you had a magical time learning all about Mage Wars. Next week in the Chit Chat, we're going to be talking about the merits of luck and ways to mitigate random factors in games. We're also going to be playing Seasons, the tableau building game from Asmodee.
See the links below for our Facebook and Twitter pages, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly updates. Leave us a comment below.
See you next week. Of course, we'll also be taking a look at a game that I will name in a few seconds. It's called Seasons. I'm glad you waited with me.
Good time.
Tom, what do you think about the social medias?
Like our Twitter page. Subscribe to our like book and comment on our social mediums.
I couldn't have said it better myself had I not been drunk.
See you in 7 days, which we call
a Freljord.
A work.
Goodbye!